Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Rescued by Valan, The Pirates of Barra, Highland Raiders by Jennifer Siddoway, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Castle Bay Village, the Barra, 1549. The sliver of a crescent moon crept out from behind a sea of clouds, illuminating the rocky coast on the Isle of Barra. A group of villagers gathered on the shore to mourn, consumed by grief at the loss of their fallen brother. They settled around the funeral pyre, taking seats on the wooden benches. Valan sat amidst the somber gathering and glanced up at the sound of crackling fire. An orange glow from the ash and flame lit the sea of faces, their expressions filled with grief. Valan's mother, Ailsa, sat on the bench beside him, and he looked over at her cautiously. He worried it would remind her of the funeral after his father died and bring back painful memories. Yet she remained impassive and stared unblinking into the fire. Her wavy brown hair was tied back neatly with a scarf, and the pale light cast a shadow across her graceful features. Their clan had lost many good men over the years. It came with their livelihood. They were a band of pirates. Their skill at sailing was unparalleled in the Scottish Isles. Such a life had brought them a dangerous reputation, and it came with a heavy cost. Their loss made the women of Clan MacNeil strong. They could withstand anything. They learned to survive even when the cruel hand of fate took their loved ones. Ailsa was no exception. She passed that strength on to her sons, and he admired her for that. Ailsa must have felt his gaze, because she glanced back at him and smiled. Valan placed his arm around her shoulders and sighed, turning his attention back toward the pyre. On the other side of him, Kent leaned in close to whisper, "Who do you think the laird will choose as the next captain? Callum was to have a successor." Valan shrugged and took a drink from his tankard. "I dinna ken. I'm more worried about the ones he left behind. Callum was a good man. 'Twould be a hard legacy to follow after." Kent had been Valan's friend since childhood, but they did not always see eye to eye. Sometimes his ambition got the best of him, and Valan would have to rein his companion in. He sensed that now may be one such occasion, and mentally prepared himself to remind Kent of the true reason they were gathered. Kent nodded and said, "Aye, but the facts are the laird will have to appoint a new captain to take his place. If the role remains vacant, the men in the village will begin to quarrel. They'll eat each other from the inside. It did not matter who he chooses as long as it happens soon. It could be tonight." Valan shook his head. "Not anyone. The laird will have thought this through. Whoever he chooses will have to be a leader of men, someone with experience that a crew will fall behind." Kent nodded in agreement, and they both glanced over to the pyre. Who would be the one to take Callum's place? There were always 4 captains in the Barra. That had been the custom of Clan MacNeil for as long as anyone could remember. 4 men who were skilled in battle and could lead the others on raids across the sea. Therefore, the role of captain was not appointed lightly. They were the pillars on which their small community relied. Currently, the men charged with the responsibility were Graham, Alexander, James, and the one who recently died, Callum. He was the reason the clan had gathered on the shore. Graham, the youngest, was and the most accomplished seaman of the day, sat across from them beside his wife, Ailsa. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a braid, and she rested a hand against her rounded stomach. Graham was his captain, the one Valan had sailed under for 8 years, and who had taught him how to fight. Graham was an expert swordsman and one of the greatest men Valan ever knew, and had the privilege to call his friend. Valan looked to him with the same affection he would his own father. "Whoever the laird chooses, 'twould be a great honor," Ailsa muttered. "They would be foolish not to accept, though I fear for them already." "If it were me, I'd pick Alistair," Kent whispered. "He has the skill and experience to run a ship." Valan glanced at the massive beast of a man sitting quietly on a wooden log. Graham's quartermaster was an impressive seaman. He had the skill and charisma to become a captain. Yet Valan knew something that Kent did not. "Aye, Alistair would be a fine choice, but he has no desire for it." Kent scoffed at the suggestion. "How do you ken?" "We've spoken about it many times," Valan informed him. "Trust me when I say he wants none of it. Alistair is content serving as Graham's quartermaster." "Then he's a fool. Anyone would turn down the appointment makes an insult to the laird." Valan pursed his lips. "True. Let's hope it did not come to that." "Fine," the seaman told him with a sigh. Who would ye choose? Valan shrugged, not caring to speculate on the prospect any more than he had to. "'Tis not my place to say. I just hope Siobhan and their children find some comfort." Valan glanced over to Callum's window pointedly. Her pain was evident in her expression. The grief, the loss, the fear, all of it. Valan remembered the same feeling when his father died. It was like part of him died as well. Now their sons were without a father. That was a tragedy within itself. It was easy to forget while they were out at sea there were ones who depended on them at home, families who loved and cared for them. Kent sighed. "Aye, you're right. It's selfish to be thinking about what could happen. We should be comforting Siobhan and tending to her needs." The three of them watched the quiet strength of the captain's widow and stared at her in awe. She stood at the front of the growing crowd with a tattered shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Two children stood beside her, all of them staring at the auburn flames as they rose higher into the sky. The red hues of the crackling fire reflected in her eyes, which misted over with tears. Ailsa took in a deep breath of air, and Valan reached out to take her hand. "I'm here," he told her softly. They both understood that Siobhan's hurt would not be eased in the coming days. Her grief would only pass with time. The small community of pirates would come together and support her. No lady of the clan would be left alone in their time of need. A salty breeze blew past them, and Valan frowned. The men on the beach grew restless, their conversations getting louder, as they waited for the laird to come down from Castle Kisimul, the stone fortress in the center of the bay. The Black Castle, as it was known, had been the ancestral seat of the clan for generations. Surrounded by water, Kisimul was only accessible by ship, part of what made it such an impenetrable fortress. It was barely visible in the darkness, and as they waited, an eerie hush fell across the crowd. The bitter smell of ash and salt mingled in the air around them as Valan turned to see what had captured their attention. On the water, he made out a tiny rowboat coming toward them. The oars cast ripples in the moon's reflection and shattered the illusion on the sea of glass. Laird McNeil stood on the bow while his guards rowed them across the bay to the funeral gathering. The time for conversation ended. When the boat arrived on the rocky coast, Laird Thomas McNeil stepped out with his hands clasped in front of him and came to join them at the fire. Behind him stood his daughter Claire, a stunning beauty who rarely left the castle. Moonlight reflected off her alabaster skin, and she moved so gracefully it appeared the lady was floating off the ground. Her hair was pinned back into a braid on the crown of her head, and she wore a fur-lined cloak, the same color as her raven tresses. She followed close behind her father and bowed her head respectfully. The laird held a commanding presence that demanded respect wherever he went. It was impossible not to feel the weight of his company. His black hair was streaked with silver and topped with a cap on back of his head. The dark gray coat he wore came almost to his knees, and he bore a silver pin on the right lapel. He gazed out across the crowd and addressed them, saying, "Today is a sad day for our clan. We lay to rest one of our own, one of our finest seamen. Callum died in the line of duty, serving our people and bringing home supplies to enrich our lands. We all knew him. Many of ye sailed with him throughout the years. His loss will be felt throughout our community for years to come. 'Tis right that we send him to the next life with dignity and respect." Turning to Siobhan and her children, he said, "Good lady, we feel your pain. Ken that ye will now be left wanting. Ye will always have a place among us. We are more than seamen. We are the people of Barra, and we take care of our own." A murmur of appreciation rose up throughout the crowd, and she nodded toward him gratefully. "Thank ye, me lord." Laird McNeil nodded stiffly and raised his hand to silence them. "I ken the other reason we are here is to delegate a new captain. 'Tis something I've thought long and hard about. I've been in council for most of the day with my advisors. There were many to consider for the job, but after much discussion, it became clear that one name stood out above the rest. There was one I could trust to lead our men into battle, one I could proudly call my captain. When one captain falls, another rises. The time has come for him to take his place as a captain of one of my vessels." Valan glanced across the sea of faces as he listened to the laird speak. He was in rapt attention, just like the rest of them, waiting to hear what the laird would say. He noticed the laird's daughter glance in his direction with a little smile. "Valan," announced. His voice echoed through the crowd, and Valan glanced up at the laird in shock. Ailsa gasped and reached out to take his hand. A low murmur rumbled through the crowd. Confused, Valan spoke up, saying, "Aye, my laird?" Laird McNeil smiled. "That is my decision. Valan McNeil, ye will be the man to captain one of my ships." He and the laird stared at one another across the flames as the people around him whispered. The fire hissed and crackled on the wooden pyre, casting a menacing shadow across the laird's face. There were so many emotions going through him, Valan didn't know what to think. Of all the things he expected to happen that night, being appointed a captain was not one of them. "Ye want me as captain?" he asked in disbelief. "Aye, that is what I said. Do ye accept?" Valan stuttered in response, still trying to collect his thoughts as everyone stared at him. He recognized Kent's displeasure instantly, but didn't let that stop him. "Aye, your lordship, 'twould be an honour." Laird McNeil smiled with approval, though it did not reach his eyes, and then turned his attention back toward the crowd. "I trust there are no objections." "He's a child," one of the seamen grumbled. "Nay, more than 25. A few others nodded in agreement. "Ye want us to follow a wee lad?" The laird frowned. "He might be young, but Valan has proven himself throughout the years. He's one of my greatest seamen, and the most skilled with a sword by far. I challenge any one of ye to defeat him in a duel." "He's right," Alistair piped up from across the fires, "and nae younger than Gram when he became a captain. I sailed with Valan for years and would be honoured to serve him. He may be young, but he has a good head on his shoulders." "And are ye going to be the one to sail with him?" one of the men shot back. "The one who pays the cost for his bad decision?" Alistair shrugged. "If that is my laird's wish, then so be it. I believe in him, and so should ye." Out of the corner of his eyes, Valan noticed Graham beaming at him with pride. The seaman who originally complained spoke up again, saying, "I still do not like it. It should go to a man with more experience." "You did not have to like it," another snapped. "Valan is the laird's decision, and that is final. Will you respect the laird's command, or will we have to fight?" The man scowled at them, placing his hand on the hilt of his blade and then storming off toward the village. Tension within the crowd was palpable, and Valan could sense his mother's fear. She clasped his hand tightly, and he heard an audible shift to her breathing. Valan placed his hand on top of hers as a means of comfort, but his eyes never left the laird. Laird McNeil turned to Siobhan and said, "Lady, I would ask ye for your husband's signet ring." She nodded, approaching the laird with an outstretched hand. In her palm was a silver ring with the crest of Clan McNeil. Valan could not remember how the custom began, but the 4 rings of the Barra captains were a symbol of authority. It was a visible representation of their place in the community and gave them the right to command a ship. He stared at the ring as it passed from Siobhan to the laird and felt his chest grow tight. Laird McNeil gestured for Valan to come forward, still fixing him with a cold brown stare. Valan swallowed hard as he stood up from his seat and came toward him from across the circle. His heart pounded in his chest, and he glanced to Lady Clare uncertainly. When he reached the laird, Valan held out his hand in a cupping motion. Laird McNeil placed the signet ring in the center of Valan's palm and clasped his hands together. Valan stared at his hand agape, still in disbelief that this was really happening, and read the words inscribed into the band. Around the sigil read the clan motto, "Boduai no boss, conquer or die." A respectful clap came from those remaining on the beach, and the laird embraced him stiffly. The nobleman pulled him close and whispered so no one else could hear, "I trust this means there is no more bad blood between us." Valan grit his teeth as the laird released him and nodded. "Of course." Laird McNeil nodded approvingly, his smile not quite genuine, but enough to be believable. "What happened to ye, brother, was unfortunate. I hope this will mend the feelings between us. Ye have a bright future." Valan nodded again. As the laird turned away from him, Valan looked to Clare accusingly. She grinned at him from across the crowd with a twinkle in her eye. There was no doubt in his mind that she had something to do with this appointment. The laird would not have chosen him on his own, yet somehow she convinced him. He wanted to ask her so he could find out what really happened, but Valan and his mother were quickly caught up in the onslaught of congratulations. Well-wishers came from all around the pyre and murmured their congratulations, which he accepted in daze. Elspeth and Graham made their way over to him with open arms, saying, "Congratulations, Valan, I cannot believe it." He accepted Elspeth's hug and patted her gently on the arm. "Thank ye, lass. I'm still in shock." Graham came up behind her, his eyes dark and arms folded across his chest. "Congratulations, my friend. Though I am grieved that I must find another seaman from a ship, the honour of captain could not have gone to a more deserving man." "Thank ye, Graham. Your words mean a great deal." Elsa approached them through the crowd and looked up at him with teary eyes. "Oh, my son, what has he done to ye?" Valan felt a twinge of guilt when he saw her, not realizing until that moment it would cause her such distress. He sighed and placed his hand on Elsa's shoulder, saying, "It will be fine, ma'am. I promise all is well." They watched Laird McNeil and his daughter mingling with the villagers before climbing back onto his ship. Graham gave him a congratulatory slap on the back and said, "What are ye moping for? Ye should celebrate. Come and have a drink with me. Bess will be overjoyed." "I wish that I could," Valan responded, "but there are more pressing matters at hand. Perhaps tomorrow after the ceremony." The captain nodded in understanding and put his arm around Elspeth's shoulder. "Aye. See ye at the castle."